This episode of Serverless Chats is sponsored by Dexecure. This week, Rebecca and I chat with Ajay, Nair, and Talia Nassi live from AWS reInvent 2021. This is Serverless Chats, episode number 122. Hey everybody, I'm Jeremy Daly.
And I'm Rebecca Marshburn.
And this is Serverless Chats live from reInvent. Pretty exciting. And we can't really hide the guest. So this is our guest. Our guest today, and I'm going to bring
Rebecca.
Is Rebecca. And also Ajay Nair, who is the general manager of AWS Lambda functions, AWS Lambda experience at AWS.
Yes.
Thank you for being here.
Always good to be back, Jeremy.
We are broadcasting in the house.
Yes.
You want it back?
Going out everywhere.
Yes, I always like to also be known by my alternative names wherever possible. Yes.
All right. Well, we are so happy you're here. Happy to be back in reInvent. And I want to say, just for all of for all the people that put this event on, AWS, such an amazing job. The COVID protocols, everything that has been just to make this happen, make this event. Everybody's vaccinated. Everybody's wearing masks. And please, PSA quickly, go get vaccinated, so that we can do more of these things, so that we can get through this and do that. So anyways, so we are super happy to have you here. And what I'd love to do just to start off maybe is, just in case people don't know who you are, just give a quick overview. What do you do at AWS?
So, Jeremy, I've been with AWS now about close to 8 years. I was one of the original launch members of the AWS Lambda service. So over the years, I've worn different hats. I started out as just the PM for Lambda, then became the PM manager and director for Lambda. Over the last year or so, I've been running product and engineering for how developers, administrators, and operators experience serverless and building on Lambda in general. So, most of the things that you like and don't like about Lambda, you can blame on me in some form or fashion.
Well, there are a lot of things we like about Lambda. So why don't we start off? What are some of the big launches that happened this week, and then maybe we can put those into context.
Yeah, no, that's a great place for us to start off. Like you said, it's great to be back in a forum, interacting with the community and customers, and just hearing live feedback about some of these things. So we've had a collection of launches, at least the ones that made the reInvent forum. We try to make sure that there's a cadence going through the year. Like we had pre-invent, and I'm sure there's going to be an official post-invent season as well. So you should not count these as the end of them all. So let's see some of the things we had this week. So we talked about, I think earlier in the week, we launched event filtering for all the Lambda-based event sources. So that would be DynamoDB, Kinesis, SQS, and others. Essentially, you can now define filters on message attributes that allows you to control what events are being sent to Lambda. It's both sort of a throughput and cost optimization capability, allows you to get a lot more specific about the logic you want to push for.
Yep.
I think in the similar vein, we launched partial batch support for SQS and Lambda together.
Yep.
Previously, you had to kind of send the entire batch through to process events. When you're building systems using SQS and Lambda together, you can do partial batches. Let's see. Well, this ended up being a pre-announce, but I'm sure it'll be something we get into the hands of customers as soon as possible. We pushed one of the limits that customers definitely keep running into. We are going to be increasing the ephemeral storage space that we get as part of Lambda to 10 gigs.
10 gigs.
Previously, if you needed to push something like that, you would have had to push your own EFS system. Whole class of use cases where sharing EFS drives across different compute systems makes sense, but we also have customers who are like, hey, I just need ephemeral storage, I just need something that's built in with Lambda, just push that number for me. So, we're now at the, we have 10 gigs, 10 GB RAM, 10 GB of memory with 6 virtual cores.
Base 10,
and
that's the number.
base 10, right? And then tens of thousands of concurrent executions as you kind of get going, which is fun. Although I will say we have changed our pricing to 1 millisecond, so that's no longer on base 10, unfortunately. So we have to break the pattern somewhere. I think that general collection's been really good from the core serverless perspective. I think I was really happy to see the broader announcements in Adam's keynotes with all the services adopting the serverless operational model.
Right, yeah.
Redshift, MSK, EMR now all offer serverless flavors, which specifically means You have spin down to zero or never pay for idle. You have automatic scaling built in based on usage, which for services like Redshift, it's super complex for us to be able to pull something like that off. And you're now getting that serverless operational model more and more pushed through all these services, which I personally am, this is one of those times where I'm really happy when the word serverless starts to mean a lot broader because it's the right thing. The operational model is getting broader and broader over there.
So that's a lot of launches.
Yep.
And week is not over. And also here you do more than like launch, right? You go to EBCs, you talk to a lot of customers, you talk to potential customers, prospects, like vendors, all sorts of people. I'm curious if you could tell us maybe about the best question you've heard so far, whether or not it's the way the product functions, whether or not it's something about Lambda itself or one of the launches itself, or from a customer in a specific use case. Is there something that stands out to you where you're like, wow, we didn't think of that, or we thought of that, but it's a complicated answer, and how do you go into that?
No, I hadn't thought of that, so thank you for thinking about it. It wasn't so much a question that came to me as a product owner, but a question I heard two technical leaders among the customers ask themselves. And what was fascinating for me was it's a question we have been trying to get customers to ask for a long time, and now it just organically happens, right? So they were debating about the scale and availability benefits you go from a server full approach versus a service full approach, and we were talking about the various points of failures that you have to handle and what happens when you run with Lambda or EC2. And at one point during the question, one of the leaders looked to the other one and she goes, "Why wouldn't I build on serverless by default?" Right? And the other person said, "Well, that's a point to you. I don't have a good answer for it." And I'm like, there you go. That's the question. That's the question that you all should be asking all the time, is saying, why wouldn't I adopt a minimal footprint service-based approach to going and building and delegate as much as I can? Because they were operating for speed. They were operating for agility, cost efficiency, elasticity as their business required at that point. And seeing that light bulb go off for them just based on the conversations we were having is very gratifying, right? So launches all help turn no's to yeses or maybes into yeses, but hearing that organic, like why not, happen is really gratifying. So
on a personal level, I just want to compliment you because I think you've seen that for a long time. Since 2014, you saw that question being one of the end states. Like that's the question we want to get to. Why wouldn't I?
Yep.
But there's probably also a timeliness to it. Took years to build it into that question. Do you feel like this is the first year that question is most resonant, or are you like, oh, well, it's actually been about 3 years we've been asking that question?
No, it's. I would say that it's been a question we have prompted and customers have accepted and processed through. I would say through the COVID window is where we are seeing more and more customers go through this question by themselves, because everyone's going through that realization of, I have to be far more efficient. Like speed matters for me, right? Like earlier in the window when COVID started, we had so many companies, including governments, like the UK government, Indian government, come out and say, we're building serverless-based systems for putting out COVID-based testing and registration sites on you. That was the fastest way for them to build, handles the scale that they wanted to, and and run faster over there, right? And you see that kind of wheel click of saying speed and cost efficiency has to come from this approach happening more. So I think the big shift is it's gone from why would I do serverless to like, if we remind them, like, have you thought about it? They say, like, that's a good question, to them themselves asking the questions internally. And at that point, that's the best part for all of us, because if they're asking that themselves, then that's a discussion that doesn't need, the serverless believers, so to speak. Role, right?
So I've been watching the pre-invent releases, some of the ones that have been announced. I'm hoping there'll be more tomorrow at Werner's keynote. But for me, I'm looking at all these releases and I think to myself, I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like the Kinesis one is cool and the Redshift one is really cool. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. And then it's like, well, now you can, send S3 events to EventBridge. And those are, they seem like they're game changing in the sense that now I can, even the event filtering, a great one where it's like, I can do things and I don't have to have as many moving parts and I can kind of get rid of some of that footprint, like you said. But all of these launches to me seem very incremental. A couple more features, maybe up the limits a little bit, a couple more things that can scale to zero. But for me, the transformative ones for serverless was obviously Lambda when that launched.
Yep.
But then step functions and EventBridge, like those were like massively transformative things that changed the way that we wrote applications completely. And I'm just curious, like, Are we topping out? Are we sort of like at the end of the serverless revolution here, and now it's just we need to get people to use it, or is there a next step?
So, well, you have tapped into a debate which we've been having internally as well. So I'm gonna state something out there which will coin some phrases, right? So, so first, look, I do believe when a product is going through the maturity cycle we're going with there, it matters more that we keep pushing out barriers for customers than anything else and making things more efficient, more scale. Like one of the core benefits we've always talked about for serverless is it gets better with you doing nothing. Right now, like if you were running event filtering before and you were doing everything in code, you now just found a whole bunch of code to go delete, right? If you were previously paying, for 100 milliseconds, we dropped it to a millisecond, it's gone. You flip a bit on it, you deploy on ARM, the cost gets a lot better. This was one of the releases with Graviton and Lambda that we did earlier in the year, right? So, but I do think, like, if you go back to the original, vision of serverless and Lambda, we had said it's the fastest way for you to go from ideation to production, right? Minimal code, minimal operations, right? Like even the word, the famous no ops frame started out earlier on, and we will move past that.
We do not support
no ops here, right? Exactly. That's a bad word. But I do think what's happened in the phase is we had that initial spurt where we were like, hey, this is a great way for you to build. And I think what has happened is the last few years has been about making the operational model mainstream. And I think we're at that point. Like you look around, no one questions, what is the serverless operational model? If anything, you're seeing it being used in, that term is being stretched in ways that we hadn't imagined when we started out. But the concept of abstract infrastructure, scaling should be right, spin down to zero should be right, is just mainstream. And the fact that you're seeing services like EMR and Redshift and Aurora and Kinesis and DynamoDB and every one of them kind of switched to that model, is the momentum is there, right? And I think that journey is going to continue of like incremental capabilities to improve integrations. You're going to see more of these things. You brought up Lambda, step functions and others as primitives that came up. And so, one thing we have talked about is, hey, is there a missing primitive over there? Like we've talked about, I think you and I in a previous podcast, we talked about cache as a missing primitive.
Right, yeah.
Maybe something like that will happen soon. But I do think, I'll borrow a parallel from the MCU over here, right? We are at the end of what I will call serverless phase one.
Okay.
Right? We have established the primary players, the models understood, we have all accepted the premise.
Yes.
Right? Like just like in MCU, you accepted the premise, like, yes, we have superheroes and they're part of our common life. Suspension of disbelief. We are all accepted that, hey, the serverless way works, right? Like it's fast, it's cheap, it's secure, it works over there. I think we're at the beginning of phase two, and I don't know what that looks like yet, right? Like, I wish I could predict, but I don't know what it looks like. And I think there it is, it's not about the operational model, it's about getting people to buy into the development model, right?
Yeah.
We work so hard to bridge the development model they're used to, right? We're saying, hey, you like writing with code, you don't like config as much, that's okay, bring all the code you want, we'll make it easier. I think solutions like App Runner or Cloud Run or others, that's the right
Or
piece.
even Serverless Cloud.
Or even Serverless Cloud, there you go. Yeah, I love that service, I never thought of that one. They help you bring the way you build into the operational model that you should be. But then the ones who have also pushed the edge know that code becomes a liability over time, right? Like, the more you push that down to services for automation, the more you minimize your footprint of code, the more these agility and scale benefits come out. And I think serverless phase 2 or serverless V2 or serverless plus, right? Serverless plus is going to be about making that experience concept mainstream, where people are used to taking service primitives, quickly assembling them to the app they want to, community sharing of those patterns, bringing those patterns together and making that go faster. And what that's going to look like, I love all the innovation that's going on across in the community and ecosystem. Like Serverless Cloud's a great example. I like what the folks in Begin are doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the past, Stackery and Sam and others have tried various flavors. I'm assuming that we could kind of play on those particular ones. And that kind of brings all of those pieces together for us to kind of make sure that Serverless V2 is pushing into a flavor that we all can understand, right? And I think this, by the way, is one of those things where I look at someone like Cloudflare. Right? I like some of the pieces they're doing because in some ways they're one of the few players who are also trying to experiment with this serviceful development model and pushing it to more customers and seeing what that looks like, right? So that's cool. Like, I think as a community, we need more people trying to push that development model as opposed to only trying to bridge back, right? It's one thing to bring people to where we are,
right,
but we also need to be building what's coming next.
Right, and I also think there was a lot of gravity from, with what AWS was doing, where it's like, well, if I want a NoSQL database that's serverless, well, then I really have to choose DynamoDB, because it was like the only one that was out there. And then you did some work and you created I'm blanking on the name, but the Cassandra version of it, and DocumentDB and some of these other things. And then you had other companies that started following suit. So MongoDB has their Atlas, which is serverless, AstraDB, which is another Cassandra serverless option. And I think that type of momentum now, where developers can come in and say, well, I don't want to use DynamoDB, I want to use Cassandra, or I want to use Mongo, or whatever. Now they can start using familiar tools with the serverless mindset behind it, and I think that's super important. The other thing I want to say too about infrastructure as code, because you say code is liability. Code is not an asset. The more code you write is the more code you have to look at, and this is one of the things that what we're trying to do at Serverless Cloud is we also think that infrastructure as code, when you have to write all of the mappings to the different primitives, that becomes a liability, because all of a sudden now you go from DLQs to Lambda destinations, and then all of a sudden you have to unwind a whole bunch of infrastructure as code, and that doesn't update for you automatically.
No, I love what you said about choice that customers need to pull out, and making sure that it surfaces in an opinionated way that they have to build, right? I think the direction you have to end up is, or at least I would assert, is you want the list of serverless primitives to keep growing. Like people need to have all the flavors of everything that they can make available over there, right? Like you have a slightly different model of programming model choices, use Fargate or Lambda. You have slightly different preference in data modeling, use DynamoDB or Aurora or Cassandra, whatever else that catches your fiction, right? So it has to be, huge selection of primitives, right? Including the tooling ecosystem for what it's worth, right? Like you have all the vendors and people who are out there, right? I think you're going to have opinionated ways of putting them together, though, right? Like I think that's where the experience comes in, and I think you're going to see more and more opinion come into experience. And when you're putting together services, that's where concepts like infrastructure as code come in, right? Like, in fact, I've been kind of wondering whether infrastructure as code is a term we need to do away in the serverless world, right? Because we are almost invisibly teaching people that the services they're working with is actually infrastructure, and it's not. It's application primitives, and that you're composing together as this thing, right? So should we be calling it app composition, app integration? Like we've talked about stuff like that in the past. And I do think that's a place where I hope to see some new stuff come up, right? Like where infrastructure as code becomes more of the assembly language, and there are higher level primitives that sort of push it. We're trying something like that with Sam. I love what's going on in the serverless cloud space as well. But we'll see. Like, it's phase 2. We'll see. Or serverless plus. We'll see where it ends up.
So in a serverless plus world, do you see AWS producing more of that opinionation?
That's a good question.
No, that is a good question.
Thank you.
I don't think it'll ever be only AWS, right? I think AWS's success has always come from its partner and community and ecosystem. Like even the way serverless development is spread, it's required tools like serverless framework and others to say, hey, here's creative models for doing it, right? Like I would be the last one to claim that AWS has the solution for everything. Like we're really good at creating the primitives and making them move faster. I do think we'll be sharing our own experience on how these primitives should come together. Like, we have large scale adoption within the other parts of Amazon. Like, nearly half applications are built using Lambda in some form or fashion. So you will start seeing more of that opinion show up in the way we develop. But not everyone wants to build like that. There will be teams who want to build maybe they want to build like Capital One. Maybe they want to build like Steady. Or they want to build like Branch. They'll have different opinions of how that comes together. And that's okay, right? Like I almost imagine that just like you have language selection today, and you have popular languages, you're going to have flavors of these serverless experiences and how the primitives come together, right? And just like nowadays, we don't really, like every language has their own way of expressing, loops and variables and states and everything. But ultimately, we all understand what loops and states and variables look like. Just like that, I imagine a world where functions, workflows, queues, and event buses will be just well understood primitives that you can kind of treat differently. But the way you compose them will have idiomatic stuff that works with your language and otherwise, right? So no, I do not see AWS as the only one doing it. I hope that our primitives perform the best in terms of scale, availability, latency, and capacity, and our experience is one that helps customers move faster. But won't be the only one.
So speaking about steady, so Zach Cantor, I think, had a tweet at one point that said the next AWS will be built on top of AWS. And I think that's an interesting thing, because the question is, what is AWS's job? What's their role in this larger ecosystem? And as you said, or as the question that Rebecca asked is, if you're focused on these primitives and making these primitives compatible with all of these potentially opinionated things, because you've got enterprises that want this, and you've got another company that wants that, and you've got this really broad ecosystem where everything has to integrate. I'm just really curious, where AWS kind of falls into that, because right now, if you said to me, hey, I need to process a webhook from anywhere, and I need that to do some processing and put it into a database, I think I can come up with about 7 or 8 ways that I can do that right now, all with serverless capabilities. And the question is going to be, what's the right one to choose, and when's that the right one to choose? And again, I think it's part of the organizational structure of AWS with the 2 pizza teams and a lot of people working, not working as cross-functionally maybe as they could be, but again, with an organizational side, I think it's hard to do. But I'm just curious, that type of, or maybe this isn't a question, more of a wish list. More of a wish list is I think as more of these opinionated frameworks come out, what Sean Wang calls a self-provisioning runtime, that these sort of things, that AWS will work with these frameworks to say, well, what is it that you need us to do so that you can make the right connections and you can speed up that developer experience?
Yes.
There you go. All right.
No,
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, there we go.
All right.
No, look. So to 2 call-outs over there, right? And I think you heard Adam speak about this in his keynote as well, right? AWS has to do more to help build, both horizontal and vertical experiences for customers, right? And I think you're going to see the same flavor when you're talking about a developer audience, an administrative audience, and otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see more of these opinionated approaches come together. With narrower focuses, right?
Yeah.
One of the asks I heard out here was saying, I wish AWS had a personalized button that only showed me the services that I use.
Right.
And I'm like, I've never thought of that.
Don't type personalized into the search bar though, because you'll get a different service that doesn't do what you think it might do.
Right. Skills of naming aside, I'm sure that some flavor of personalization on AWS would be something that all of us would enjoy seeing. And I think that kind of view is something I would hope that as part of the simplification of selection, as part of building that opinion, you will start seeing baked more and more, right?
Yeah.
You see some of this with customers doing this with things like CDK patterns. Mm-hmm. We have serverlessland.com where you're saying, you know what, if you know nothing and you're starting with these patterns, here's the simplest way for you doing so. We're in the early days. Like I said, serverless plus is just getting started. A year from now, hopefully we're back here and we're like, hey, we talked about these things. Look, we're all getting to grow up a little bit.
But I think you're right, though, that baseline or the sort of the infrastructure that's needed, the operational model is there. And now it's just on all of these other people out there to start figuring out what are the patterns to do all this stuff, and in a way that you can deploy these patterns and implement these patterns without going through this potential pain point of writing all this configuration.
I agree. So I will say, as a provider of these services, and this is not just AWS, mm-hmm. I would put this out as a call to action for anyone over there, right? You have to make sure our primitives meet the promise that we're all putting there.
Yeah.
People are trusting us with their security, with their scale, with their latency and others, and we have to keep making that better. We have to provide the governance hooks, the hooks for observability tools to plug in, the hooks for all these things. And it's not so much that those have to be standardized APIs, but there need to be APIs. Those need to be interfaceable. Those need to be customizable so that as people build opinions, they can build the opinions they want to bring and bring that forward, right? I feel like the wrong path to go down here would be you end up building these services that only work together a certain way only work with a certain set of services. One of the things we have worked quite a bit on over the last few years is loosening some of those opinions, things like extensions, even the fact that we're doing container emit support, right? A lot of that was helping people come from where they are, but I do think those rules carry forward even when you're looking at what people need to build next.
Yeah. Do you have another question? I have one more question for him. We're running out of time.
I have a final question. I think mine's a final though. So
yours
you
is a
might want to go
final?
first.
Okay, mine's almost a final question too. So Kinesis.
Two finals.
Kinesis, they announced on-demand Kinesis at the keynote yesterday. And I saw it. I saw that it was, it was now priced, I think, per second, for the streams. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, all right, finally, I can tell Chris Munns that Kinesis is serverless. And then I think I think Ben Kehoe corrected me.
Yep.
We're not quite there yet, huh?
Not quite there yet. But it's always good to go and correct Chris Munns. That's always a fun sight to see. I've certainly had my experiences on both sides on that. Look, I think there's value in what Kinesis has launched, even as an on-demand capability, right? Like the auto-scaling capability, the granular pricing is something that gets over there. Kinesis is a complex and rich footprint for us to go and do so, and I'm confident that with the engineers who are working on it, they're aware of the feedback customers are giving, and eventually you will get, my hope at least is you will see some flavor of, spin down to zero, and if you had asked me 3 years ago, would Redshift end up with a serverless offering, and I'm like, I have no idea how you would even do that, and yet here we are. So never say never, but at least let's make the most of on-demand Kinesis that we have, and fingers crossed in a full flavor.
And I got to play around with it a little bit, but I feel like there might be some automation you could put in there to turn those streams off when you're spinning down a development environment or things like that. So you might be able to work it in, but
So I think you should think about more of this as it's spin down to one rather than spin down to zero.
Good point.
And so just like with other systems, when you talk about spin down to one, there are benefits. It's always running. You get started instantaneously, scale benefits, optimizations that way.
Yeah.
The downside is that the cost number hangs out for a little bit longer than you would like to. But if there's one thing AWS is good at, it's improving cost structures as we go along, as we have seen with even some of our recent announcements.
That's a good point.
All right, Rebecca.
So as the leader of Lambda experiences, maybe you could say you're the father of all these launches. Are you allowed to have a favorite? And if so, what's your favorite?
So am I allowed to have a favorite? I get giddy about most of them, right? Like I remember when, I'll maybe say two if that's okay. Right?
Okay.
So one, I really like, this is actually not a Lambda launch, and we didn't actually talk about it. So SageMaker launched serverless inference that's powered by Lambda. And I love the broader story of Lambda being an invisible component that just makes things work and brings the serverless model elsewhere.
Totally.
We have talked about powered by Lambda. In other cases, we've had external systems that, Netlify functions and others. SageMaker doing serverless inference on us, and ML inference is such a popular scenario right now. Like having that as a smooth scenario. Love the slickness that's come, and there's more. It's just in preview. My other one was actually SAM Accelerate, right? Because it's right there, like this.
Right.
It's part of that serverless plus story where you go and say, yes, I'm opinionated about the fact that local emulation is not something you do as much. You test within the cloud, but it's done in a way that brings sort of that old experience back to the new. It gives people a path to the future, as opposed to just saying, I'm going to meet back to where you are. So I love what the team launched over there. Every time I see the demo, when I played with it, it was just like, yes, this is like, I love the similar experience that you're doing in serverless cloud. So those are the two that would jump out. But
you handled that so gracefully. That was such a are you allowed to pick? You're like, well, I got two.
You must have PR training.
You thought about this for a long time.
Yes. Before I let you go, I will say I think my favorite launch so far was the serverless Redshift.
Yeah.
Because I really, really love Redshift as a data warehouse. We've used it at a number of companies I've worked with, and then when I went to a startup, the cost was just prohibitive to really store all the data that we wanted to store there and have those clusters constantly running. And I love the fact that now you can get row-level updates, which you can't necessarily do with S3 to Athena. So I think there's some interesting patterns there as well. That serverless patterns site is going to have to add quite a few new ones.
That's what the new year is for.
Perfect.
So, anyway.
All right. Well, Ajay, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of reInvent. I'm sure there are some more. There are probably some more launches tomorrow at Werner's keynote that we will find out about all together.
And like I said, watch for the post-Invent season. There'll be more coming there too.
Perfect. All right. Okay. So everyone watching, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back with Talia and Nassi. We're going to talk more about SAM Accelerate and a bunch of other really cool things.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, OpenDeck-Secure. OpenDeck-Secure is an open-source, cloud-agnostic edge development framework that lets developers jump straight into product development without worrying about setup. OpenDeck-Secure has frameworks and development tools to automate web asset optimization, implement resilient CDNs, and provide you with access to first-party analytics. If you need help getting started on multi-cloud serverless at the edge, take a look at OpenDeck-Secure to simplify the setup and start building the product you're passionate about. Learn more at decksecure.com/open-source. And if you like or support what DeckSecure is doing, Join the community by visiting their project on GitHub and follow them on their journey.
And we're back with Serverless Chats with our next guest, Talia Nassi.
Hello,
Thanks for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me. I've heard about this podcast from so many people, and I feel honored to be a part of it. So
We
thanks.
are honored to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, it's a very special moment in time in Vegas because your dad's birthday.
It is.
Yesterday.
Happy birthday, Dad, if you're
Right?
watching.
Happy birthday, Talia's dad.
Yeah.
So maybe we can start, just give us a quick overview. Tell us what you do at AWS, what you do with serverless.
Yeah, so I'm a senior developer advocate with AWS Serverless, and I started on the serverless team in April, so I'm relatively new to this space, but I got started with developer advocacy a few years ago, and so at AWS what I do is I basically teach developers how to become better with serverless. So I speak at conferences and I write blog posts and I advocate for developers and how to make their experience better with serverless technologies. And this is my first reInvent, so this is a
Welcome.
momentous
Are
occasion.
you finding it overwhelming yet?
Yeah, I haven't really slept. I kind of keep forgetting to eat.
Right. I did not eat lunch today either, I believe. So.
Yeah.
Right.
Before we dive into too much of the launches and the things that you've been talking about, so you were like a QA engineer and an engineer at a lot of different places before. That sounds bad. You've been an engineer perhaps before you became a developer advocate.
Yes.
And I think there's like there's almost a leap that you might have to take, at least from what I hear from others, right? Where it's like to be on one side and then the other.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that transition, right? Where you're like an engineer who's maybe looking to developer advocates and now you're on the other side.
Yeah.
Whether or not you're like, I'm in, or like you're like, oh, this is hard.
Yeah. So yeah, I was a test engineer for a few years, and I was as I was doing test engineering, I was learning more and more about what made testing effective for me. And one of the things that really I felt really passionate about was testing in production, and that I kind of advocated for that at one of the companies that I worked for, and it ended up that like I would speak in tech talks and do women in tech like meetups and stuff, and the traction just kind of started rolling, and then I submitted that talk to a conference, and I kind of just like I got a little momentum with public speaking because of that talk, and so I got a lot of good feedback from like my public speaking. And then the company that I worked for after I started doing test engineering, they were like, oh, we want you to become a dev advocate because you're kind of already doing it. Yeah. And then I switched over to Amazon.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So speaking about testing in production, maybe not always testing in production, but certainly testing in the cloud.
Yes.
This has become a topic that is that I'm passionate about, something we're working on, and it was funny because as we're basically about to launch what we're doing, I get a call from Farah, connects me with Stefano, and we start talking about SAM Accelerate.
Yes.
This is before SAM Accelerate launched, and basically this idea that you could write code locally, you hit save, and as fast as possible, that code gets into a test account in the cloud that then you can actually connect to all these different services. So tell us a little bit about SAM Accelerate and maybe as a former test engineer, why you're so excited about being able to test in the cloud.
Yeah, so the whole idea of testing in the cloud is kind of the same idea as like testing in production. Like, I don't care if my software works when I'm emulating the cloud because it's not the cloud. It's the same way, like I don't care if my software works in a staging or test environment. I care if it works in the actual place where my software lives.
Right.
So with SAM Accelerate, you're actually testing against the cloud, and it's super, super, super fast. I think there's like a 100 millisecond response time. So as soon as you save your changes, SAM Sync will watch for those changes, and then you can test your changes almost immediately in the cloud. It's just super, super fast. And there's SAM Build, which builds your code, and then SAM Sync, which syncs your code to the cloud. And then when you run SAM Sync -- watch, you can just like have that running, and every time you save a change, it'll just push that up. and it makes testing just so much easier.
Right. Now, have you found, now what is the reception to SAM Accelerate? Like, how are people feeling about this new, like, I don't need to install local stack anymore? And again, nothing wrong with local stack. And I keep saying this over and over again. I think Brian LaRue is watching us right now. And I want to say, I absolutely love Begin, and I love Architect, and I love what they do to emulate that local environment for you, because it gives that developer that sole package. And I think that's an awesome step for a lot of people that need that. But if there's a way for us to get things into the cloud so that we can test against, on-demand Kinesis, and we can test against serverless Redshift, and we can test against our SQs, and all those other things can happen, I think that's where we want to go, right?
Right. And to your point, I think when we make it as close to production as possible, we're really telling the developers giving feedback of like how your feature is actually going to work. And so the feedback that we've gotten, first of all, I don't think a lot of people know about SAM Accelerate yet because it's such a new feature that's released. I think we released it like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago maybe. So I don't know that a lot of people know about it. I have heard great things on social media. People are responding really well to it, but I hope that after people listen to this, that they'll go and try SAM Accelerate. I don't know that we've gotten like a ton of feedback yet, but I've heard good things on Twitter, so.
Very cool.
Yeah. How was the development experience for you? Were you involved as a developer advocate? Were you also involved in the product conception and growth of SAM Accelerate? So
I think SAM Accelerate has had the birth of it, the conception of it started a long
years ago.
Yeah. Way before I was at AWS. But I know on my team, Eric Johnson was very, very tightly close to this. So hi, Eric, if you're watching. This is in Eric's wheelhouse. I know he was a part of that.
Yeah, because I'm wondering if they got to test on you all.
I'm sure.
Before.
Yeah. I'm sure they did, and also like AWS wouldn't go through all of that if it wasn't something that customers were asking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's definitely something that we had to get feedback for, that like customers asked for it and they wanted it, and that's why it was one of the biggest things that we launched.
So you recently, just yesterday actually, I think, spoke on stage with David Richardson.
Yes.
Will you tell us a little bit about what your specific role was on stage?
Yeah. So there were 2 demos that I did for the serverless keynote. The first demo I did was SAM Accelerate, where I demoed a few different commands. I demoed SAM Build, SAM Sync, and then I did SAM Sync with state machines. And then the second demo I did was Step Functions Workflow Studio, the new visual workflow studio, which I think in every in every single talk that I've done at reInvent, 5 total, all of them I talk about the Step Functions Workflow Studio. So it's a really impactful feature, I think. It's, for those of you who don't know, the Step Functions Workflow Studio is a new visual experience that gives developers the ability to visually and intuitively build your workflows. And it's just an easy, intuitive UI to understand how to connect different services. So you don't have to worry about like configuration code or workflow definitions. You just focus on your business logic, and you don't have to worry about like how to connect the dots.
So I know that you, Jeremy, I'm cutting you off. I have one more.
No, okay, no, go ahead.
So I know that you prepared quite a bit for your presentation yesterday on stage.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are plenty of engineers who would also be wonderful developer advocates, but there's like something that's a little scary. And I think public speaking for a lot of people is quite scary. So maybe do you have any tips about like, hey, when you're about to get on stage for the first time, I know that wasn't your first time, but you're about to get on a big stage, is there anything that you do to help you feel like really confident to get on that stage?
Yeah, so there's 2 things. One, you just have to be really, really prepared. You know, the more prepared you are, the more you rehearse, the more you practice. That's gonna be a good thing. And also, I feel like you should only really speak about things that you're really passionate about. If you're passionate about what you're talking about, you're not gonna be as nervous as if you're talking about something that you don't really care about. So I feel like the more that you are into it, the more that you're passionate about what you're talking about, it's gonna make it a lot less scary.
So I was going to say, as proof of life, or to prove that we're live, Brian did get back to me. He says, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, we totally agree. These things are complementary. SAM Accelerate is brilliant, and we are very much looking forward to deleting our emulation layer someday.
Wow.
So that is, but I think that is the future, and thank you, Brian, for that, because I think that is the future. That is the idea, to say, if you can quickly get code and infrastructure to spin up and be in that environment for you, the fidelity there is just amazing, right? But I want to say, I love what LocalStack did, because they filled a gap. It's so hard for a lot of people who are building serverless applications to get their code into a state where they can actually test it, and it's just such a great forward step to that. The other thing I wanted to say, because you mentioned the step flow functions, step functions workflow studio. Okay, I'll get it. But yeah, so the idea behind that, and just this overall user experience, and I know you don't work on the Amplify team, Ali and a bunch of other people, we had them on the show to talk about the amazing things that Amplify is doing. But really, for you, are you seeing that developer experience, these pieces are just starting to fall into place? We were talking a little bit with Ajay about this, this idea of like, where's AWS's role? But I mean, what are your thoughts on where this is going, and you feel like this is all going in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened was, in my breakout yesterday, there were two themes that I kept coming back to. Serverless development is getting easier and faster. Mm-hmm. With every launch that the serverless team releases, I feel like it does one of two things. It either makes serverless development easier or faster. And I talked about that a lot yesterday in my breakout. And the Step Functions Workflow Studio is a great example of that, where it's going to speed up how fast, it's going to speed up how you're developing your state machines, and it makes it easier because it has like this great visual UI. That's just another way that serverless development is becoming easier and faster.
Right.
And same with SAM Accelerate. I mean, it's so much easier to test. It makes it faster to test. I think those are the two themes that we're gonna continue to see in serverless development.
Love that.
Yeah. Since you've been, this is your first reInvent, so I'm sure I'm always overwhelmed no matter how many years I've been here. Is there any emerging trend that you're hearing from either customers or vendors or at breakout sessions or workshops that you're like, oh, I think that's where we need to go next? Have you kept hearing kind of a same pain point or a same like drumbeat, I guess?
So what I've heard from my colleagues is that, previously at reInvent, a lot of the questions that people have gotten have been more like low level, like what's serverless, like how do you develop with Lambda, like very kind of broad questions. And the questions that we're getting now are very, very deep, like 300, 400 level, like how do I build this thing with this service and this, and like they're very like much more complex now. I feel like that means that people are like utilizing serverless more and more, and they have like more hands-on. I mean, I feel like the past couple years with COVID, like everyone just kind of was like in a deep learning.
Right. A lot of videos, a lot of content created. Yes, right. Absolutely.
So I think people are getting into it a little bit more now, and it's not about like what's serverless or what's Lambda. It's more about like, I want to build this specific thing with these services and tell me what the best way is. And
all right, so speaking of some deep 400 level questions, let me see if I can throw one at you here.
Let's go deep.
Event filtering, right, which Jay mentioned briefly. Tell us what event filtering is.
Yeah. Okay, so with events that get put onto a stream, so I'm talking about Kinesis, I'm talking about DynamoDB streams, and SQS streams. So basically, anytime before event filtering, anytime an event was put onto a stream and put into the Lambda function, every single event that was put onto the stream would trigger the Lambda function. Now with event filtering, you can say like, I only want this type of event to trigger that Lambda function. It could be like an attribute of the event. It could be like something inside the event. It could be like the example that I gave yesterday was, think of like a Peloton race. In a Peloton race, you have events firing at every second, and each event has like a ranking of how you're doing in the race. So like at second 5, I could be ranked 12, but at second 10, I could be ranked 3.
One.
Right. Yeah. So and so let's say that I wanted to do something where I wanted to get the ranking at the end of the race.
Yeah.
And I didn't care about the ranking in the beginning. So before event filtering, every event that would come onto the stream would trigger the Lambda function, and you're paying for all of those invocations. Yep. So now with event filtering, you can filter so that, if you have like a final attribute, if you're only checking for like final equals true, then then all the other events like don't matter.
Right.
Lambda doesn't care about like, this second, this event. It only cares about like the final event. So it's going to dramatically reduce the number of times your Lambda function is invoked. It's going to save you money. It's going to cause your whole applications to run faster.
Right.
Just overall.
Is there any like paradigm shift you have to educate people about when starting to use event filters?
I don't think it's necessarily with event filters. I think it's just events in general are so different than like APIs. So it's just a different way of thinking. I think once you nail like events and you really understand the concept of an event, then event filtering kind of like fits into your workloads more than you would if you were using like APIs, for example.
Yeah.
But I think it fits really nicely into event-driven architecture.
Okay, so I'm going to get into the 400 level question.
I think
now.
you have another
Okay,
400.
So,
Yeah.
well, so now this there was workarounds in the past. So before you'd be reading off a DynamoDB stream, I would read every event into that DynamoDB stream, and then if I wanted something else to happen as a result of a created or it matches some event pattern, whatever, I would go ahead and I would maybe use the Lambda API, and I would do an asynchronous invoke somewhere else, or I'd put it on
you could
Event
do it
Bridge.
in the Lambda function.
In the Lambda
A lot
function,
of
I'd write a
people have
whole
done
big,
that. Right, like-
thing, and I wouldn't be able to isolate it. And maybe I get a lot more creates than I get updates and deletes, and
Right.
now I have to scale all those things, and I'm competing with services. Maybe I dump it into Event Bridge, and then I lose ordering and all kinds of stuff like that. So the interesting thing about the way that this works now is I think, and maybe this isn't a question. Maybe I'm just making a statement.
This is Jeremy's favorite.
Right, this is what I tend to do. I'm like, let me see if I can find a question in there. No, but so this is something that I figured out too, is when you say you save money because you're only invoking it when those events come down, you're also saving money in that you're not reading everything off the stream anymore.
Right.
And I've confirmed this with a few people, that you're not reading off everything off the stream anymore, that the Lambda poller itself will eat all those costs and only charge you for the ones that actually get delivered.
Right.
So you could be using a Kinesis stream, for example, for a lot of like clickstream data, but you're only interested in certain events that you want to do something with a Lambda. Now you may have 5 or 6 Lambdas, each one does something different, all reading off the same stream, but you're only getting charged for the actual ones that invoke the Lambda functions,
Right.
as opposed to everything. So,
Right.
and also, I haven't played around with batching yet. Oh, there's my question. How does batching work with the event filtering?
Yeah, so right now, what happens is you filter your events, and then your events get batched up into where they're supposed
okay.
to go, and then it gets sent to the Lambda function.
So you can still, so if I still wanted like a batch of 100 or whatever,
Yep.
it'll compile those even
Yep.
based, okay.
Yep.
Very cool. All
Can
right.
you also, this might be a very 100 question, so sorry if I'm taking it back there, but
Oh, that's fine.
could you also decide to say event filtering, on this Peloton race, I want to be able to return this every 10 seconds or every 1 minute,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
don't want to return it every second.
Yeah.
And then to the end user, do they end up they just feel it as saying like, oh, it takes 10 seconds to update before it tells me
Yeah, you can configure that.
all of that.
You
Yeah.
have batch sizes and like batch time windows or something like that. Is that
Yeah,
the
I
other-
think there's a default, but you
Right.
can configure it.
Yeah.
That makes
Very
sense.
interesting.
Everything configurable.
Yeah.
All right. So
I think you had another 400 in there, Jeremy.
I maybe had
I want
another
to queue up
400.
that last one for you.
Maybe the
What did I
hardest question.
want to talk about? So we didn't get a chance to talk about all the different things with Ajay because we kind of kept it a little bit higher level. But what about like batch publish to SNS topics?
We
That was
did
at
actually
least-
get to where we were going. Okay, good.
Okay.
So
All right.
I know with batch publish now, there's a new batch publish API for SNS that
Yep.
matches what SQS did a while ago. So now you can publish messages in batch with SNS, and it saves you money, and it makes your development faster.
Right. Right.
So there's 2 days left. No, let's see. What day is it today? Wednesday.
I don't even know. I don't-
There's like 2 days left.
I don't know what day.
Where might people find you for the rest of reInvent?
So I'm doing a workshop tonight, and the workshop is
It's a small one, right? The hands-on workshops where it's like 50 people.
no, it's like a 400-person workshop.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
Uh,
It's a party. You're hosting a party tonight with computers.
Oh, it's on serverless image processing.
Oh,
Nice.
And
Very
we're
cool.
using the new Visual Workflow Studio from SubFunction.
Very nice.
I know where I'm supposed to be at what time, but
So what time is that and where is it?
it's 6:15 at the Venetian on the second floor.
Okay, cool.
Love it. Well, all right. So we're running out of time, so we just have to tell our listeners. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you. Thanks so
Super
much.
excited.
Welcome to AWS.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's always great. I
Thank you.
love that getting more people on the serverless team and people, especially people pushing testing in the cloud. I love it.
Yes.
Anyways, but we have
Doing
an
charity
announcement.
majors, testing and production.
Right, exactly. Test and production.
Deploy on Fridays, test and production.
Yes.
So Rebecca,
Deploy at any time.
right.
Yeah.
So Rebecca and I, we are going to take a break for the winter. We're going to take us to holidays and all that kind of stuff.
We're gonna go into a bear den.
Yeah, right.
We're gonna eat a lot of stuff. We're
Right.
gonna hibernate.
Right. Well, I don't need to eat anymore. COVID and bread killed me. So, but we are going to take a break for 2 months, and we'll be back in February. And we're going to have all new episodes. And I don't know. Cross your fingers for Werner. We've been trying really hard.
At Werner. If you are watching. Travis, if you're watching.
Travis and Lisa?
Lisa?
Right, exactly. So it could happen. We're super excited about it.
Well, a few things.
Yeah,
One, thank you to all of our guests.
absolutely.
Thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you, Jeremy, for asking me to be a co-host.
Thank you for accepting.
And of course, yes. And then when we come back in February, if you all have guests that you would love to hear from, Werner, please let us know, because we are preparing and we'll be prepared in February, but we are happy to hear from you all who you want to hear from.
Right, amazing.
Anything else you want to add? I totally just...
No, just I mean, it's been great. We've done 15 episodes this fall.
15?
something like that.
20,
It's
18?
2,800. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's been a lot. Whatever it is, it's amazing. But this has been super fun. I'm looking forward to keep doing this with you and having more great guests like Talia and Ajay and just Werner. And all kinds of things like that.
Can you
and
say Werner for us?
It's
Burner. At Burner.
it's gonna
Paging.
Right, it's going to be great. So, anyways, thank you, everyone, and we will we'll see you on Twitter, but we'll be back with new episodes in February.
And that's this week's Serverless Chat. Rebecca and I want to give a huge thank you to Ajay, Nair, and Talia Nassi for being our guests this week, and to our sponsor, DexSecure. If you want to check out the show notes and a full transcript of this episode, you can find them at serverlesschats.com/122. For more Serverless Chats, subscribe, sign up to be an insider, check us out on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can connect with Rebecca on Twitter at Becca Odelay and me at Jeremy_Daily. And if you want to keep up to date on everything serverless, make sure you subscribe to the Off by None newsletter at offbynone.io. We're taking a winter break, but we'll be back with all new episodes on February 7th, 2022. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with all of you again next year.